One thing that's important for us to recognize is that the upshot in this passage, in either case, is that God saw the wickedness of the human race and decided to kill everyone. Well, almost everyone except Noah. So there's nothing wrong with these debates, but we need to make sure that they don't obscure or eclipse the bigger story of what's happening, whatever the perversion of the human race entails.
About 2,000 human bones.
2,000?
To the best of our knowledge right now, those 2,000 bones represent about 500 human beings.
Nearly all of those human remains, he says, were also dug up from ancient Native American burial sites similar to these. Okay, that sounds like a staggering number.
It's very staggering.
Why would anybody have that many human bones?
I don't know. I truly don't know.
Native American burial sites dating back thousands of years have been a source of fascination for archaeologists for decades.
Meticulous care must be exercised.
This old government film showed the excavation of an ancient Native American village in Alabama. Over time, many other sites have been looted by people seeking artifacts and even skeletons.
Nephilim. Are they giants of the Bible or a Jewish lore? Hello, welcome to meggdigital AI. We'll explain. But first, a little story. Welcome, curious minds, to a journey back in time where myth intertwines with reality. Today we embark on a quest to uncover the truth about the Nephilim, a race of beings born from the union of the divine sons of God and the mortal daughters of man. Our exploration takes us to the crossroads of science, technology, mythology, and religion, as we delve into ancient texts and the latest archaeological findings to unravel this ancient mystery. The myth unveiled. In the ancient texts, they were called Nephilim, giants among men, known for their strength, their violence, and their immorality. But who were they really? Were the Nephilim merely mythical beings, or is there evidence to suggest they walk the earth? Let's explore the historical and religious documentation that first introduced the world to these enigmatic figures. Sons of God and daughters of man. Once upon a time, in a world much younger than today, the sons of God gazed upon the daughters of man and found them fair. From their unions came the Nephilim, beings of immense power and dubious morality. But what can science tell us about these unions? Could they symbolize ancient encounters between different human cultures or even species? Giants among men. Legends speak of the Nephilim as giants, warriors par excellence, whose very presence inspired fear. Archaeology offers clues hidden in the earth, giant skeletons and ancient artifacts that hint at the truth of these tales. With the aid of technology, we analyze these findings, piecing together the puzzle of the Nephilim's true nature, a legacy of violence and immorality. The stories tell of a world plunged into chaos by the Nephilim's actions, leading to divine intervention. What evidence exists of such turmoil, and how did these beings influence the moral compass of their times? Through the lens of anthropology and historical analysis, we examine the societal impacts attributed to the Nephilim, the flood and the fate of the Nephilim. As the earth cleansed itself with water, what became of the Nephilim? Did they vanish into the annals of history, or did some remnant of their line survive? Unpacking the myth of the Great Flood, we explore its significance across cultures and its possible connections to the disappearance of these mysterious people. Conclusion. In the end, the line between myth and history is often blurred. The story of the Nephilim challenges us to consider the intersections of our beliefs, our history, and the scientific world. As we close this chapter, we are left with more questions than answers, a testament to the enduring mystery of the Nephilim. Wowzers! Wasn't that story interesting? If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to like it. Help us grow our channel by sharing this knowledge with your friends. Thanks for watching till the end to receive a special gift.
When the FBI showed up at Don Miller's home in rural Indiana in 2014, it was a shock for people who knew him.
He was very beloved. He was very charismatic.
Former local reporter Liz Dykes interviewed the 91-year-old former engineer about his time in World War II, his missionary work in Haiti, and most of all, his huge collection of artifacts from around the world.
The entire house is a museum. There are things everywhere. It was just mind-blowing.
Miller even gave tours of his collection. So when the FBI came calling, she says,
I wanted to know what they were looking for. There had to have been something.
there was.
This is a good time to point out that every time bones are discovered, the police have to be called because it could be a crime scene. So anytime the police are called and they come and discover these ancient bones that are of large size, well, the police then go on to call a museum, such as the Smithsonian, and then the bones are never seen or heard of again. The revealing of giant bones would bring validity to the history of the Bible and would also put a massive wrench in the theory of evolution that is taught all throughout the world in the scientific community. These are two reasons why the discovery of giant bones are never made known to the public.
Something the FBI hasn't talked about until now.
When I first went into his house and saw the size of the collection, it was unlike anything we'd ever seen.
Tim Carpenter heads the FBI's art crime unit.
Unlike anything you'd ever seen.
Not only me, but I don't think anyone even on the art crime team.
FBI photos never before shown publicly give a glimpse of the collection. Some 42,000 items, including pre-Columbian pottery, an Italian mosaic, and items from China, some that Miller labeled Chinese jewelry from 500 BC.
Roughly half of the collection was Native American, and the other half of the collection was from every corner of the globe. This piece, as you can see, it was labeled by Mr. Miller.
The problem, Carpenter says, was that the FBI found a lot of it had been illegally obtained. Miller admitted he'd gone on digging expeditions in foreign countries and around the United States for decades, in violation of antiquities laws.
Did he understand that he had obtained some things illegally?
He did.
So he admitted that.
He did.
Miller eventually agreed to let the FBI seize some 5,000 artifacts so they could be returned to their countries of origin. But Carpenter says all the FBI's careful planning couldn't prepare them for another, more disturbing discovery.
So the FBI says it got a tip. Won't say where the tip came from, but basically the tip was that he had artifacts that this person believed had been illegally obtained, and it's likely that that person probably had, been in the house and seen them, because Mr. Miller was open about most of his collection. He had a lot of items there from a lot of different countries, and keep in mind that a lot of the artifacts that they seized, 5,000 artifacts, were, the FBI determined, illegally obtained or possessed, that he dug up in various countries or in the United States. So at that point, they didn't even know that there was a large quantity of human remains. All they knew was that there were artifacts that, and possibly a few remains.
So he was open about some of the artifacts, but not about the human bones, correct? Where did he store those?
So he had, as you probably see in the video, he had this vast collection, kind of like a museum in his basement. And when we say basement, you see the photos, he put up his own lighted display cases. There were tables laid out. It's very organized with this enormous collection. It's not your ordinary basement. But what the FBI says is that the human remains were not on display. And the FBI came there, with a huge operation, which Miller had agreed to let them come and do. It was not a drop-down, all of a sudden raid where they startled him. He knew they were coming. And they came prepared with some 80 agents, all these tents. That was to handle museum-quality artifacts that in some cases could have been centuries old.
Wow.
So they came prepared for that. That's a huge operation. I mean, think about it. You don't want the FBI to be the one that breaks something, and they don't want to be the one that breaks something that has survived for centuries, right?
Right.
And was fairly well preserved, according to them, in a stable, temperature and humidity environment in his house. Not ideal for a museum, but stable. They get into this house, and that's when they discover at a certain point that there are all of these human remains.
And what is his explanation initially for all of these human bones?
So, we don't know the initial explanation. We don't know we do know that he admitted to digging at Native American burial sites. These are ancient sites that are protected in this country for very good reasons. These are the ancestors of today's Native Americans in America, of these tribes. And it's as if somebody were to say, you know what, are you okay with me going and digging up your ancestor 8 generations back? I suspect you're not. Yet why was it okay for a long time in this country for that to happen in Native American communities? And when you talk to Native American leaders, they'll tell you, look, it's basically it's treating them like they're not people.
Right. Now, Anna, it sounds like he could have faced a variety of criminal charges.
Yeah, he could have.
And why did FBI agents decide not to charge him?
I think it was a judgment call.
Turkey has many connections to giants in their land. In the late 1950s, during road construction in the Euphrates Valley, southeast of Turkey, fossilized human remains were uncovered. At the site, an engineer measured the femur, the leg bone, and reported in a newsletter that it measured to be 47 inches. Joe Taylor, director at Mount Blanco Fossil Museum, was commissioned to sculpt the human femur. According to this femur bone, the giant would have stood about 14 feet tall. There's also the strange occurrence of underground cities all around the region of Turkey. The Basilica Cistern is in Istanbul, the largest of several hundred underground cisterns that supplied Istanbul with water. Derinkuyu is the deepest underground city in Turkey with 18 levels and a capacity of 20,000 people. Dara Cistern and Necropolis in Mardin is an underground complex of water reserves and tombs from the 6th century. These are just a few references to the underground cities in Turkey, but it makes you wonder, why were they building these underground cities? What were they hiding from? Could it have been the giants that were allegedly living in their land? Here's a few pictures I came across from Turkey in 1821 to 1825, which is either regular-sized humans standing with a dwarf or giants standing with a regular-sized person. Worth pointing out is that some people believe that Noah's Ark is on top of Mount Ararat in Turkey, and of course one of the reasons why the Great Flood was sent was to wipe out the giants and the fallen offspring, the fallen hybrids, that were alive in the land at that time.
But before we start, since we are dealing with a very, very complicated area, an area where many of us have already formed opinions, let me remind you of there's a principle. According to Edmund Spencer, he articulated this: there's a principle which is a bar against all information. It's proof against all argument. And it's something which cannot fail to keep man in everlasting ignorance. And that principle is condemnation before investigation. So one of our challenges as we go into this very complicated topic is to set aside our prejudices and presuppositions, and let's see what we can find out. Now, the same idea is not only articulated by Edmund Spencer, but it also is in our collection of Proverbs by Solomon, who reminds us that he that answereth the matter before he heareth it, it is a folly and a shame unto him. Now, if you study ancient legends, you'll discover the most earliest cultures. Sumer has these legends, Assyria, Egypt, Incas, Mayan, Gilgamesh in Babylon, Persia, Greece, of course. Most of us are familiar with the Greek versions of this mythology. India, Bolivia, South Sudan, even the American Indians speak of the star people that came down and so forth. And I came across a fascinating reference in a book that was considered at the time very reliable, the autobiography of William Cody, commonly known as Buffalo Bill. And if you look at Buffalo Bill's autobiography, Colonel William F. Cody in 1920, there's a paragraph, I put part of it in here. He says, while we were in the Sandhills scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. They said these people were 3 times the size of a man of the present day, and they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo, and taking the animal in one arm could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. The bone was too big, they didn't have wagons, so they didn't keep it. So he recorded it in his journal. So I don't know what to make of that, but I think it's interesting. You'll discover, if you study Indian lore, that the Indians were terrified of the 6-fingered people. That's why when they met a stranger, they held up the hand to prove they only had 5 fingers. This how business is Hollywood, but the idea of greeting a stranger with your hand so you could count fingers. You'll find that recorded in the pictoglyphs in Chaca, New Mexico, among other places. Anyway, moving on. There is a book that I have a extensive library, but someone was kind enough to add this to it, by Stephen Quayle, which is an encyclopedia of giants, all relating to Genesis 6 and other subjects. And this came out in 2002. I'm just giving you a couple of snapshots. It's amazing. He has a catalog here of hundreds of giants in human history that we have records of or pictures of. Here's a couple of guys. You wouldn't want to meet them in a dark alley, would you? Here's a guy 9 foot 4 inches, Makhnov and Chiquita Tufa. These are, of course, used in shows and stuff back in turn of the century. Here's a gal by the name of Lady Amma. She was 22 years old, 7 foot 9 inches, with 2 elder sisters. You notice the one of them is very small. She ends up marrying a Chinese dwarf. These are from the late 19th century. Here's Captain Martin Van Buren and his wife, Mrs. Ann Bates. Both of them about 8 feet tall. She was actually a little taller than he was, or very close to it. He was born in Kentucky in 1847, and they, of course, were on exhibit throughout Europe, but these pictures were part of the promotion and so forth. I could go on, but just to give you some there are records of giant people, 10, 13 feet kinds of people, and skeletons, hundreds of them. It's one part of Stephen Quayle's book highlights the fact that for strange reasons they always get covered up. You really have to do some digging to get the records and stuff. He spent 30 years pulling his encyclopedia together.
Nephilim are giants of biblical mythology, dotting legends of both Jews and Christians alike. Their nature is vague and uncertain, as is their origin, due in no small part to how apocryphal much of the information about them is. Regardless, they are widely understood to be large and mysterious entities who possess great power. So what do we know about the Nephilim? Are they giants? Do they descend from angels or fallen angels? Was the famous giant Goliath one such entity? Here's everything you should know. What does the Bible say about Nephilim? The phrase Nephilim appears in 3 locations in the Bible. Once in the book of Genesis, once in the book of Numbers, and another in the book of Ezekiel. The first mention in the book of Genesis takes place in Genesis 6:4 during Parashat Noah. The verse is as follows. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of the nobles would come to the daughters of man, and they would bear for them. They are the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Right before that, in Genesis 6:2, it says the following verse, that the sons of the nobles saw the daughters of man when they were beautifying themselves, and they took for themselves wives from whomever they chose. In this case, the phrase sons of the nobles is a translation of Bnai Elohim, which can be translated as sons of God. However, this is not always translated that way. According to the biblical commentator Rashi, the phrase refers to the sons of princes and judges. Others have posited that the sons of God were angels who had children with humans. The result, according to some, were the Nephilim. While this theory is especially popular among Christians, it is present in Judaism too, specifically in the Midrash. This story's existence in Midrash isn't disputed. In fact, it is even mentioned in the Talmud, in Nida 61a and Yoma 67b. What is disputed is how literally one should take it, since in Judaism the free will and agency of angels isn't really a factor. Angels in Judaism are seen as just messengers with no autonomy. Even Satan is but another angel doing God's work. Regarding Genesis 6:4, Rashi says that the word Nephilim is actually derived from the word naflu, itself a root of the verb to fall. Not because they were fallen angels, but because they caused the world to fall, in other words, caused the biblical flood. This is in line with the text referencing the wickedness of the time. The next mention of Nephilim in the Bible is in the book of Numbers, regarding the tale of the spies. The verse reads as follows, "They spread an evil report about the land which they had scouted, telling the children of Israel, 'The land we pass through to explore is a land that consumes its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are men of stature. There we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, descended from the giants. In our eyes we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we were in their eyes.'" Here we see the word Nephilim translated as giant. The inconsistency regarding the translation of this word is a recurring issue here. Here the verse identifies the giants as the sons of Anak, another group of people known as the Anakim. The identity of Anak is a matter of debate, but there is historic corroboration for the existence of the Anakim, perhaps not as giants, but as a people, and they are mentioned in ancient Egyptian records. The question of angelic descent isn't really an issue here. In this case, these Nephilim seem to simply be giants. The last mention of the Nephilim in the Bible is in the book of Ezekiel. The verse reads as follows, "But they will not lie with the mighty men, for they are inferior to the uncircumcised who descended to the grave with their weapons. And they laid their swords under their heads, and their iniquities were upon their bones. For the destruction of the mighty was in the land of the living. Here, the phrase mighty men in Hebrew is either Gibborim Nophilim or Gibborim Nephilim. If the case is the former, which seems likely, then it simply means fallen heroes or fallen warriors.
In this particular case, we're going to be talking about Genesis chapter 6 and the days of Noah. It may surprise you to see us, out of 24 sessions, spend a full session just on chapter 6. And there's some reasons I'm doing that. There are a number of places in the Bible where there are passages that are controversial. There's several different views, and what we try to do is present the different views so you can do your own homework and come to your own conclusion. And we'll do that this time, but I want to mention something that's different about this particular chapter, because I'm going to suggest to you that 9 out of 10 pastors are confused about Genesis chapter 6. And so we're going to move into an area that's kind of technical in some respects. I used to regard it as just a peripheral, kind of interesting, but peripheral issue. But as the years have gone by, and as I've done more research, I was startled to discover that understanding this chapter is foundational to understanding most of the Old Testament, as well as prophecy. It's not just a part of the misty chapters of early Genesis. It is very foundational to understanding the rest of the Bible. So we're going to focus on this.
Chapter 6 begins, when humans began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. The fallen ones, or Nephilim, were on the earth in those days, and also after, when the sons of God came into the daughters of humans. And they bore children to them. Those were the mighty ones of old, men of name. Well, let's start with the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is Nephilim. Who are the Nephilim? Now, if the term Nephilim were used in my Hebrew class, my students would translate it fallen ones. If Nephilim means fallen ones, why did the Septuagint translate it gigantes, or giants? It's an interesting question. Now in Numbers chapter 13, we'll get there after a while, the 10 scouts compare the large size Anakites to the Nephilim. Actually, they say the large Anakites are Nephilim. Now the problem in this case is that the narrator of Numbers chapter 13 says that the 10 scouts are giving a bad report, and in that case meaning they are giving an intentional distortion of the facts. So that really raises a question for us, is I understand why the giants from Numbers 13 might be put into Genesis chapter 6 by the Septuagintal translators, but it doesn't seem like a bad report that's intentionally distorted is a good reason to think that there's giants here. Now, when we look at Genesis chapter 6:4, we realize that if we read it very literally, like the translation I gave you, the passage characterizes the Nephilim without respect to their size. It says they are mighty heroes, persons of name. We might say persons of reputation from antiquity. Now, they could be large-sized warriors, but not necessarily. They're described here for their might, their prowess, and their fame. Now, who are the sons of God, and who are the daughters of humans? That is, literally, the Ha-Adam, the human race. Now, some say that the daughters of humans are females from the line of Cain, and the sons of God are males from the line of Seth. Now, where this comes from is, if we remember in Genesis chapter 5, which we looked at in this session, Adam is a son of God, and Seth is a son of Adam. So in that sense, the line of Seth, that's spelled out in chapter 5, they could be the sons of God, over and against the daughters of humans from the line of Cain. That's one way to go, and there's some other spins that could go a little bit of a different way. but specifically, the genealogies in Genesis chapter 4 and 5 are thought to maybe line up to these two people, sons of God, daughters of humans. But others say that the sons of God are celestial beings. Sometimes we call them angelic beings, fallen ones who are perverting the human race by seducing women. Now, although Christian laity often enjoy debating these and other views.
How many of you know about Noah? Oh, you've heard of Noah before? About 80%, no? Okay. I'm kidding, of course, but the ark and all of that will be chapter 7, 8, and 9. 7 and 8, actually, and then 9 at the end of it. So we're going to focus, though, on chapter 6 tonight, particularly, because we need to understand that, because there are some conditions that will impact your understanding of almost everything else in the Old Testament, and thus the prophecies. So Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. Now the first thing I want you to notice before we get in this, I want you to notice verse 1 and 2 are a single sentence. It's amazing how much confusion has been generated by splitting that single sentence into the two verses. Genesis 6, verse 1 and 2. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Well, the first thing it hits us is sons of God. What does that phrase really mean? The sons of God. You want you to notice when men began to multiply, that's men in general. No particular subset, we're just men multiplied on the face of the earth, and they had daughters. We're talking daughters in general. We're not talking about a specific group of daughters. We're born of them, that the sons of God, whoever they were, we'll come back to that, saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, they were attractive. I assume that was a general attribution. And they took them wives of all which they chose. That's kind of a strange phrase, by the way. In the Hebrew especially, it implies that the wives didn't have much choice about it. They took them wives of all which they chose. And so now, what about this word, sons of God? In the Hebrew, it's Bnei Ha-Elohim, Ha-Elohim, sons of God. But it's a phrase, to understand what it means, we need to examine the rest of the Bible. And you'll discover something interesting. That phrase is used of a direct creation of God. Okay, what did that include? Adam was a son of God. He was a direct creation of God. He fell, become sinful. You and I, as natural-born sons and daughters, are sons and daughters of Adam in the natural. We have a genetic defect. It's called sin. Therefore, we die. Well, babies are innocent. No, they die also. See, even though they may be given certain allowances by God until they get the age of accountability, they also have a genetic defect called sin. We're sons of Adam, not sons of God. The term son of God in the scripture is always used of a direct creation of God. That includes Adam, and it includes the angels. In fact, that particular phrase, if you search the entire Old Testament in the Hebrew, it's always used of angels.
Who are the fallen angels in the Bible? The issue of fallen angels in relation to the Nephilim are a subject of considerable debate, especially since while Jewish legends and midrash do discuss them, Judaism itself largely does not believe such things exist due to the traditional Judaic understanding of angels. What about other giants in the Bible? The nature of the Nephilim aside and their biblical mentions, the issue regarding giants in the Bible is far more complex. For example, aside from the Anakim, there were also the Rephaim, or Rephates, mentioned on multiple occasions in the Bible, though whether they are physical giants or ghosts or deified ancestors is another debate altogether. Then there are the Amorites, the Amorim, who were one of the nations in the land of Canaan. The Amorites are verified as having existed based on other contemporary records and accounts in the region, though the Bible describes them as massive, gigantic figures. Among specific giants in the Bible, however, two stand tall above the rest: Og and Goliath. Regarding Og, he He is described in the book of Numbers as the king of Bashan, an enemy of the Israelites who they defeated. Midrashic and rabbinic commentaries, however, describe him in greater detail. Here we see Og was a survivor of the biblical flood, either being too tall for the flood or clinging to Noah's ark. Supposedly, Og picked up a massive mountain to throw at the Israelites in the desert, but Moses stopped it. Others say that as Og lifted a mountain, Moses jumped up to a very ridiculous height and cut Og's ankles with an axe. Exactly how big Og was is another matter of fierce debate. Regarding Goliath, the story in the Bible is that Goliath was a giant who served the Philistine army and offered to fight the champion of the Israelites. David, the future king, took up the challenge and won with a sling. Rabbinic literature gets into even more detail, saying that Goliath was actually the descendant of Ophrah, sister of David's ancestor Ruth, but that serves to underline the lack of angelic connection here, meaning Goliath was likely not one of the Nephilim. Regarding Goliath's height, this is also something that has been debated, but regardless, the results are far less gigantic than other giants, like how big the Nephilim are commonly assumed to be. Generally speaking, the two main estimates of Goliath's height in the text, depending on the translation, are that Goliath is either 4 cubits and a span, 6 feet 9 inches or 206 meters, or 6 cubits and a span, 9 feet 9 inches or 297 meters. The former are the oldest texts, including the Dead Sea Scrolls and the writing of Josephus, and are at a much more conservative estimate. In fact, while such a height would be far larger than anyone else at the time, it is something that is very much realistic and has happened in real life on many occasions. Great flood from the Bible, the Book of Giants. One last mention of giants in the Bible comes from their presence in Apocrypha, such as the Book of Enoch, Book of Jubilees, and so on. However, one notable book stands out from the rest, the Book of Giants, which was known to have existed for thousands of years and was included among the Dead Sea Scrolls. This book discusses the fallen angels known as the Watchers or Grigori. Their descendants with humans were known as the Nephilim, or Rephaim, or even Gibborim. However, these texts are still apocryphal and have not been accepted in the Jewish canon. After all, the Dead Sea Scrolls are believed to be the work of the Essenes, a known Jewish mystic sect that not all Jews took much stock in. As such, the validity of any of them as legitimate Jewish religious writing is the subject of debate.
This next claim is by far the most incredible, but it has a picture to go along with it, and is from a giant that was allegedly uncovered in the mountains of Romania that was 32 feet tall. In Rosia, Montana, Romania is an area that is known for mining. The story goes that a group of miners were following a gold vein, which led them to something that they reference now as the Hyperborean Gallery, or Gallery 13. This allegedly took place in 1976, and there was a massive gravestone that was found with precious metals and gemstones all within it. On top of this large gravestone was said to be a skeleton that was around 10 meters tall, or 32.8 feet in total. You can see here in this picture, again, take it as you will, the massive height of this skeleton. I mean, part of the leg bone alone seems larger than that man, who is maybe around 6 feet tall. The large gravestone was allegedly cut into multiple pieces, smelted down for the precious materials out of it. Claims say that when they lifted this large stone, it revealed an opening to a pit in which some people went in but never came out, which allegedly led the army to seal up the pit and not do any further investigations into it.
Over the past 2 years, I have heard many discussions about the Nephilim with varying opinions that were not based in fact, says Joe Edge. Improper interpretation of the original text or a flawed traditional teaching seems to have ruled the day. It is my belief that an objective examination of relevant scriptures in context proves that the Nephilim were not offspring of relations between fallen angels and human women. Jewish tradition is that the Nephilim were the offspring of angels who left their heavenly abode to have sexual relations with women, thus corrupting mankind and leading to the flood. There are many problems with this interpretation, chief of which is the fact that it is based on Jewish tradition rather than the biblical text itself. The meaning of the Nephilim does not affect any significant theological viewpoint. However, an understanding of the pre-flood lineages and their relationship to salvation history is important. Only with a proper understanding of the genealogies in Gen 4-5 can one gain the context needed to understand who the Nephilim were. Why all of the genealogies? Genealogies in Scripture might not be the most exciting read, but they always play a significant role, especially in Genesis. After the death of Abel at the hands of Cain, a new son was born to Adam by the name of Seth. The two lineages of both Seth and Cain in Genesis 4:5 present a contrast between a lineage that was evil and curses and one that was righteous and would eventually include Noah, Abraham, David, and Jesus. It is the backdrop of these two genealogies that the context for chapter 6 is found. It is clear is that the marriage of the daughters of men and the sons of God was a bad thing. The main challenge with understanding the passage is to identify who these parties are. Here is a list of reasons I believe the sons of God does not refer to fallen angels. The fact that the Nephilim were subject to God's ensuing judgment proved that they were mortal rather than some supernatural half-breed. Genesis 6:1-8 is about humanity and its doomed outcome, not angels and their punishment. Contextually, there has not been any mention of angelic beings in the Old Testament up to this point. It would not make logical sense for this to be first mention of them. Angels are spiritual beings, not corporeal. Jesus indicated in Matt 22:30 that angels do not have sexual relations as humans. One can't help but notice the language similarities also between Eve's taking of the fruit and the language here. Eve saw the fruit. Sons of God saw the women. Eve saw the fruit was good. Sons saw women were beautiful. Eve took the fruit. Sons of God took wives. Both Eve and the sons of God suffered death due to their rebellion and sinfulness. Augustine and the reformers Luther and Calvin all agreed that the correct interpretation was that the sons of God referred to the lineage of Seth, while the daughters of man referred to the lineage of Cain. The intermarriage of the two lines led to unprecedented wickedness, and subsequently the flood. Israelite law would later prohibit marriage outside of the Jewish people for the same goal of protecting the against calamity for the covenant people. This should not be interpreted as an argument against interracial marriage today, but rather an argument against believers being married to non-believers.
There are some similar passages used slightly differently, but that particular term we maintain is a technical term referring to angels. Now, I might mention something so you don't get confused. When you get to the Gospel of John, 1 John 11 and 12, speaking of Jesus Christ, he came unto his own, Israel, but his own received him not. But as many as did receive him, to them gave he the power to be what? Become the sons of God, and have life through his name. So the point is, that's why, and that gets explained in John chapter, that's in John 1. John 3, he explains it. There is a new birth involved. That's not a figure of speech. There's actually a creative event that takes place when you receive Jesus Christ. That's why it's called a new birth. And that's why you are a new creature. You are then a direct creation of God, if you're a believer. And those aren't just idioms of spiritual philosophy or something. They are very, very real events. And if it happens, your life will be changed after that. It'll bear fruit. But there is a different view. The view I'm going to show you now is the way this material is classically taught in most seminaries. And as a result, most pastors, I'll show you some exciting exceptions, but I'm not talking about conservative pastors. I'm talking about the general run-of-the-mill pastors. They talk about Genesis 6 in terms of what's called the line of Seth. And the view is that the sons of God, that phrase, refers to Seth, the leadership of Seth. Seth, they paint this picture. Abel's been killed by Cain, right? Then there comes Seth. Well, Cain's the bad guy, Seth's the good guy, is the fabric they try to create. And the sons of God is a phrase, they argue, that refers to the Sethite leadership. By the way, there's not a scrap of biblical reference that supports this. This is just the way it's taught. The daughters of Adam really means the daughters of Cain. And the big mistake that was made, presumably, is that the Sethite leadership commingled with the daughters of Cain, and that was supposed to be a no-no. And there's some problems with that. The sin in this was a failure to maintain separation. There's a problem with this because separation isn't called for until chapter 11. They weren't told to be kept separate, by the way, so this is all very contrived. But even when you go through this, the other question is, well then, fine, if you got believers and unbelievers marrying, who are these Nephilim?
Then who are the Nephilim? The word Nephilim appears a second time in the Old Testament in number 1333. If the Nephilim are descendants of the Anakites, then how did they survive the flood? The Anakites were mentioned multiple times in Deuteronomy along with other Canaanite groups known for their size and military power. The Nephilim were not mentioned in any of those Deuteronomy passages. It makes logical sense that the Nephilim were a tall, strong people that were part of the Anakites but not half-angel abominations. An alternative meaning to Numbers 13:33 is that the Hebrew spies were exaggerating. They could have used hyperbole as they did, referring to themselves as grasshoppers. Either way, there is no textual reason to interpret the Nephilim in Numbers 13 as being anything more than large humans. With only 2 references to Nephilim in all of Scripture, it is hard to determine its exact meaning. Much of the argument stems from an etymological argument on what the root of Nephilim means. The short answer is that we don't know. The root word could be the same word meaning to fall or miscarriage, according to Hebrew scholars, but the reality is there is no way to be sure. What is clear is that the offspring of the sons of God and daughters of man created a race of people who were violent and immoral. The text never even states that the Nephilim were the direct offspring of those 2 lineages, but just that they were on the earth at the time.
Now, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born of them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. And now we get to, we talked about Benai Elohim, sons of God. The daughters of men, I want you to notice what that is, Banath Adam in the Hebrew. The view that is taught by most seminaries is that, well, that really refers to the daughters of Cain. And they try to create a situation that the sons of God referred to the descendants of Seth, and the daughters were of Cain, and they weren't supposed to intermarry, and that's what's involved here. I'll deal with that in more detail in a minute, but I want you to notice that's not what the text says. It's the sons of God, Benai Elohim, saw the Banath Adam, that is the daughters of Adam. So these are general girls, not girls of a particular, of either of Cain or Abel or Seth or whatever. Are you with me? Okay. Now when you get down to verse 4, it says there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them. The same became the Hagibarim, the mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. There were Nephilim. That's the Hebrew word. Unfortunately, it's translated as giants in many English translations. They did happen to be giants, but that's not what the word means. The word in the Hebrew is Nephilim, and it's important to understand this word. It comes from a root meaning nephal, the fallen ones. The verb nephal in the Hebrew is to fall or be cast down, to fall away, or desert. If you're a deserter, or if you so forth, the verb is nephal. Nephilim are the fallen ones. So there were fallen ones. Now what on earth are they? Also in that verse was the Hagibarim, the mighty ones. And these Nephilim, in other words, when these angels, now these are fallen angels, these are bad guys, you'll see in a minute. When they found some way to procreate with human women, they gave birth to hybrids. They were different than either of their parents because they were part human and part not human. And these were the Nephilim.
According to the book of Genesis, ancient Israel seems to be the original location of where giants came upon the earth. Around that same time, every culture around the world seems to have some form of documentation of giants living within their land, especially in the Middle East. Around 900 miles north of Israel is the Black Sea, and almost every nation that borders the Black Sea has some history of giants in their land. Varna, Bulgaria, archaeologists discover the remains of a, quote, huge skeleton. Varna is a city on the shores of the Black Sea with a rich culture of civilization that spanned allegedly 7,000 years. Novinite, a news agency from the Bulgaria region, documented that there was a large skeleton found in an ancient city of Odysseus, a trading post that was established by the Greeks in the end of the 7th century BC. Valery Yatov, who was part of the team carrying out the excavations, is reported as telling the local news there that the size of the bones was, quote, impressive, and that they belonged to a very tall man. However, she would not reveal the exact height of the skeleton. There's some incredible claims by an independent researcher who was alive in Armenia, a nation that doesn't border the Black Sea but is right next to it. Reuben M., who lived his whole life in Armenia, made some incredible revelations to archaeologists in that region. Reuben was known for traversing and exploring much of Armenia on foot. He claims to have come across the bones of giants on multiple locations. One he saw at a construction site, and he doesn't know what became of those bones. Another set of bones he claimed to have come across within a cave with him and his friends. Those bones disintegrated when they started to evaluate them further, but he claims to have once come across a massive skull. He allegedly left the skull in a local village, tried to get a hold of an institute of archaeology to evaluate it, and when he came back to the village a few days later, it could not be found. Reuben did find megalithic sites all around Armenia that were most likely built with the help of giants. These were undiscovered before he revealed them, and we actually have pictures of these sites. These megalithic sites are above the village of Bezhakin. Reuben claims that the director of the Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology and an academic from the National Academy of Sciences of Armenia were shocked to have found a fortress so close to the capital that was unknown to them. Southeast of that alleged location, still within Romania, is the Bucegi Mountains, where there's claims of a sphinx. We can see what is said to be a natural rock formation, but is known as the Sphinx of Romania. Many people believe that this actually was a true sphinx, in correlation with the claims that there's massive underground tunnels in the Bucegi Mountains. Some say that went all the way even to Egypt. Wild claims indeed, but we do know that there were giants in the land of Egypt, and this formation definitely has some resemblance to the Sphinx in Egypt. The Sphinx at Gaza at one point didn't look anything like it did now. It was practically buried not too long ago. And so if you see these pictures of how this was then and just give another couple hundred or maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years, it could very much look like this formation that we see in Romania.
And when the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, came in unto the B'nath Adam, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now, when you get down to verse 9, we're going to be dealing with some other verses here in a minute, but I want to look ahead a little bit. In verse 9 of chapter 6, there is a remark about Noah that unless you're very careful, unless you do some exegetical homework, you'll miss the meaning of it. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Now here's that phrase again. We ran into that phrase with Enoch, didn't we? Noah walked with God. He was a just man. That doesn't mean he was sinless, but it does mean he was righteous before God because he was faithful and obedient. But there's a phrase in here that most people miss. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. Now that word perfect in the Hebrew is tamim. It always refers to a physical blemish. Tamim means without a blemish, sound, healthful, without spot, unblemished, in other words, unimpaired. Well, wait a minute. What does it mean when it says that his genealogy was unimpaired? You see, it wasn't tainted by these goings on with these fallen angels. The human race was getting contaminated. In fact, I believe it was Satan's strategy to contaminate the human race to prevent a redeemer that was promised in Genesis 3. But Noah is an exception. He may not have been the only exception, but what was distinctive with Noah and his gang is that they were untainted by these goings on of the Nephilim, of the fallen angels. Now you say, gee, this sounds pretty weird stuff, Chuck. You're saying that these angels cohabited with women and gave birth to hybrids. Well, if that's a pretty weird idea. But if it's true, it's going to be confirmed in at least 2 places elsewhere in the Bible, right? 2 or 3 witnesses the law requires. If you turn to Jude, verse 6 and 7, that's the book just before the book of Revelation, the New Testament. Jude is making an argument that I'm not going to try to recreate here to take the time, but in his argument, he makes reference in verse 6 of this little book. It says, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of that great day. So Jude here, Jude's the brother of Jesus Christ. He's writing this little short epistle. He's speaking of angels that did something wrong. They kept not their first estate, but they left their own habitation. I'll come back to that word in a minute. He hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Then he goes on to amplify this for us in verse 7. He says, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them, in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth an example, for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So here we have an allusion by Jude that these angels, which apparently went after strange flesh, which God, because of that, they are reserved in everlasting chains and under darkness. So they're given a very special treatment. Well, this left their own habitation going after strange flesh. These are angels it's talking about here. The word habitation, here's another technicality. You'll find, you won't find this in most textbooks, but the word in the Greek in the habitation is okaterion. It only occurs twice in the New Testament. Here in Jude, and in 2 Corinthians 5:2. What does this word okaterion mean? It means habitation, like a habit or a habitation. Well, it's used only twice in the Bible. In Jude 6 we just read, it's what these angels left. These angels left their habitation. Here it says, in a positive sense, it's speaking of the believer. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our, and the same word, okaterion, which is from heaven. When we put this together, the angels that sinned shed the place they were living in, the body they were living in order to participate in this sin with human beings. That term is the body that you and I aspire to. We would use the term resurrection body. See, for in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our habit or habitation, house, which is from heaven. You and I, as believers, aspire to having an okaterion, which is given to us by God. It's our immortal bodies. But that term is what these angels shed in order to participate in this mischief in Genesis 6.
There is zero textual evidence to assume Nephilim refers to a race of half-angelic, half-human creatures. That idea comes strictly from Jewish myth and has no hermeneutical standing in Scripture. Joe Edge continues, based on this corpus of evidence, I believe that the Nephilim were descendants who resulted from intermarriage between the women in Cain's lineage and the men in Seth's. The corruption of Seth's line led to God's decree that he would wipe out mankind from the face of the planet, save Noah and his family. Had God waited, Noah's descendants would likely have been corrupted, thus injuring the lineage from Jesus to Noah Seth. Thank you for watching. Please stay safe until the next video. In the meantime, feel free to leave a comment or two and share your thoughts with us. Don your explorer's hat and grab a cyber shovel. It's time to dig into the digital depths below, where the treasures of meggdigital AI and the rare finds of Zen FBA books await. Who says treasure hunts can't be a click away? Thank you for watching meggdigital AI. Visit meggdigital.com for a wonderful collection of gifts and gadgets.